Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on Hyperdocs and Interactive Assignments. My name is Dan Neeson. I'm a Technology Integration Specialist at NeoNet. This whole webinar will be recorded and up on our training website, as well as you can get this slideshow at the short link at the bottom of this slide, bit.ly/interactive514. That'll get you this whole slideshow from this webinar. So let's go ahead and get started here. So here's what we're going to cover in this webinar today. So we're going to look at different ways that we can create a truly interactive classroom. We'll go into Hyperdocs. We'll talk about the what and the why of Hyperdocs and all the major components and how to find and make and assign out your Hyperdocs. And then we'll transition over to working with some other outside interactive tools that are really good to really mix up the traditional lecture classroom. Those two tools are called Pear Deck, and the other one is called Nearpod. And we'll take a look at both of those today. All right. And of course, as you practice through, as you watch through this webinar, I encourage you to pause it whenever you want and start to practice around with the stuff that I'm going to be talking about. So let's go ahead and start talking here about creating an interactive classroom. So what does it mean for a classroom to be interactive? Well, here's a really good definition I got from Scholastic here. So interactive learning is a more hands-on, real-world process of relaying information in classrooms. Passive learning relies on listening to teachers lecture or rote memorization of information, figures, or equations. But with interactive learning, students are invited to participate in the conversation through technology. And that very last bit, through technology, is the really interesting thing that we're going to talk about today, because the stuff we are going to talk about really brings in all your students. You can easily make this stuff differentiated, and we'll talk a lot more about that as we go throughout today as well. So how do you make an interactive classroom, right? So there's a couple key questions to ask yourself. Are students given any sort of choices about the things that they're going to do? Are they given the opportunity to be creative, where it's not just do these problems or answer this very simple objective question? Are they really engaged with what they're doing? Are they doing actual real deal, higher level critical thinking? Are they able to collaborate, not just copy? True collaboration, where students are working together to solve a common problem, not just copy off each other to answer the same question. So this is how classrooms, of course, a lot of them still look like this, but this is how classrooms have looked for a really long time. And there was a reason for it. As you may know, the reason that schools are set up like this, where everybody's doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, everybody's sitting in rows, waiting for bells to move them on to the next thing. Well, a lot of the reason that schools were set up like this was to have students be ready to go work in a factory. The thing is, there's not that much demand for factory workers anymore. We need people who know how to be creative, who know how to problem solve. And that's the thing that schools and teachers need to understand. And so instead of classrooms looking like this, they can really start to look like this. And so when we look at this picture here, if we just kind of analyze how this classroom is set up, so way over here on the left-hand side, we have the teacher and looks like a group of, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 students. It looks like a traditional kind of lecture thing. If we come to the foreground here, we have another group of students, about the same size group of students, working in a small group, or it looks like one's working independently on some pencil paper. And then over here in the back, we have some students that are working on computers doing different things. So again, students are doing different things at the same time, and depending on how this teacher has it set up, or it's some sort of station rotation where at some point the students are going to come in for the lecture, at some point they're going to do this paper pencil thing, and at some point they're going to do the computer thing. It may be a station rotation where everybody's going to do one of those things, or it's just a student choice. Do you want to go hang out with the teacher over here? Do you want to do the independent work thing here? Or do you want to go work on the computer over here? It's your choice. The objectives and materials can still be the same. It's just a different way of students choosing what to do. So here's another good way of implementing some student choice with student choice boards. I got this from Shake Up Learning. Casey Bell has a wonderful, wonderful website. I encourage you to check out that has tons of great ideas for creating a really technology-rich classroom. And this is one of the things that she talks about here. And a student choice board, she has it basically set up like a simple tic-tac-toe board, and there's 9 activities. And again, they hit all the same content points, but students can choose. They can choose any 3 in a row just to make a tic-tac-toe in any direction. Go ahead and do any of those 3 things, and students can do any one of them. If you want to see more information about that, there's a link here on slide number 7 here for Casey Bell's website. All right, so now we'll talk about implementing student choice and creativity here. So when we look at all the different kinds of ways to develop students who are creative and students who are going to really be ready for the world when they're done with school, we can create all these different types of activities for students. And so if we kind of look at this nice little graphic here, we can have students create animations or create some audio or create cartoons or create infographics or interactives or screencasts or slideshows or have them create videos. There's a million things that students can do to be creative to show what they're learning. But for today's purposes, we're just going to focus in on just one. Of course, today was all about the interactives, so students being able to kind of participate in with that sort of stuff. So we're going to move on to our first real deal topic here. All right, so let's get started with Hyperdocs. So essentially, what are Hyperdocs? So Hyperdocs are a interactive Google Doc or slide deck that has a bunch of hyperlinks in it that will link over to a bunch of different things, and you can really use them as one big self-encompassed lesson. And I'm going to show you an example real quick here. On this slide number 6 of the presentation, again, this slideshow is linked for you on our Tech Venture slideshow here. But here's an example from a government class, a government Hyperdoc here. And let me just run through it with you real quick. So in this first section here, we have an engage section where the teacher said she has the directions over here on the one side. In the middle is a quote, and then here is a spot for students to respond. That's kind of the hook or the beginning of the lesson. Then we move into the Explore section here. And here we have a couple more links to a couple other different pages here talking about government and separation of powers. This one goes over to a TED website, and this looks like it goes over into a video. If we click back into the Hyperdoc here, you can see again in this third column here, they have a spot for students to respond. And then if we go down to the next section, under this explain part here, we have a presentation that's linked here. So this is the class notes. Instead of the teacher doing the lecturing or the direct instruction for everybody all at once, she has the link for the slideshow here on the Hyperdoc, and students can come in and look at it. And then notice again, there's another spot for students to respond to questions. And then down here, finally, at the end, this is the end of the lesson. This wraps it all up. This is your conclusion, and we have a Kahoot set up. Then this just links right over to a Kahoot game for students to do to wrap up the lesson. And this is just a really good example of a classic Hyperdoc that has an entire lesson packed into one page, and yeah, it has some links that go over to other things that help expand upon what the topics are talking about here, and there's spaces for people the students to respond to some prompts. Of course, when you make these things, you can add in as many questions as you want. You can add in as many links and prompts and anything you want. One thing you may have noticed that's missing here is some pictures or videos. That's another thing you can put in here as well. Now, if you want to also use Google Slides for a Hyperdoc, you can also do that as well. In fact, it would be actually easier to use Google Slides as a Hyperdoc if you want to put in videos. So if you use Google Slides here, you'll see you can embed the video directly right inside the slideshow, and it can just start right inside of here. Plus, it's a little bit easier to move pictures around and text boxes around in a Google Slides Hyperdoc. All right, now let's talk briefly about some of the important elements and how to set up a Hyperdoc. So let's go ahead and just start from scratch. I'm going to jump out here and just go ahead and make a brand new Google Doc. And the most common types of Hyperdocs that you're going to see are you're going to see more of the Google Docs types, but you can definitely still do the slide variety as well. So in this example, I'm just starting from a brand new Google Doc here, and one thing you noticed back in our government one is it looked like this one's all built from tables, and that's a really good way to set things up so things are organized and there's a clear pace or a clear direction for what students are going to be doing. So we're going to go up to the Insert tab to start, and then the second item down we have Table, and you can make the table as big as you want. I'll just kind of mimic what we saw in the one earlier, so let's do a 3x5 table here. And what we can do now is I'm going to expand this one down a little bit here and make them all a little bit bigger here, just so I have some more room. And what you'll want to do is have really clear expectations. So maybe have one section be labeled directions, one section labeled resources, and then one column is available for responses. So we have a spot for directions, where you're going to give students directions, resources, the links that students are going to click on, and then responses, so we can record what each student says. All right. Then from here, we can start filling in whatever we want. All right. So of course that could take us in a million different directions. So I'll let you guys be the creators for that. But here's a couple little extra other tips. If you are using Google Docs here, it's going to be tricky to pull in a video. So if you want to do a video, you're just going to have to put in the link for the video. So if you pull in a YouTube video or something, you could just paste the link in here and make a hyperlink. So let's start by making hyperlinks. So under resources here, let's say I'll say watch this video. All right, and I want this sentence here, watch this video, to be a hyperlink. And I'm gonna just I'll just jump out to I'll just make a link here. So I'm gonna highlight the information I want, what I want to become a hyperlink. Then I'm going to click on this little symbol up here in the toolbar. It looks like a little chain link. And press that, or you can press Control K on the keyboard. And this is where you'll paste in that link to the video that you want your students to go to, or whatever other website you want them to go to. I'll just make this one go right to youtube.com, and I'll say apply. All right. Now, of course, it made that a hyperlink, so when a student clicks on it, they'll have this little box here that will take them out to that specific website. All right. And then essentially all you have to do is just repeat that process for all the links that you want your students to go out to. All right. Of course, this is a great thing that can be used for a one-to-one classroom. And obviously, when you have a one-to-one classroom, students all have their own device. They can all work at their own pace. They can all go to the websites that they need to go to. And that's the real big benefit of using Hyperdocs here. A couple other things I want to show you as well. You can, of course, throw in some pictures in here, and I always recommend that because that kind of spices things up a little bit. So we'll go up to the Insert tab again, and our first option here is Image. So we can upload something from my computer. I can search the web. I can pull a picture from my Google Drive, from my Google Photos, by the URL of the picture, or take a picture from my laptop's webcam. For right now, let's do Search the Web. And we can search for anything. I'll just search for dog. There we go. There's a cute little dog. And I'll say insert. And now I have a picture of a dog loaded in. There we go. And it goes right into that box. And the nice thing is, when you are clicked into that box, you put a picture in there. Most of the time, it's not going to, even if it's a really big picture originally, usually it's going to shrink it down to about the right size of the box. All right. Now, what the other cool thing you can do too is you can make the picture a hyperlink. So if I give a single click to the picture and make sure it's highlighted in that blue square, I'm still going to look for that little chain link hyperlink button. This time when you do it for a picture, it's kind of more on the left side over here. Again, you could just press Control K to do that. And of course, I'll make this one go over to whatever website I want. It could be any website on the internet. I'll just make this one go to google.com, and I'll say apply. All right. So now, if somebody clicks on this text over here, it'll take them over to YouTube. If somebody clicks on the dog, it'll take them over to Google. Of course, you can put whatever website you want. So just like we saw in the example Hyperdoc, some will take them out to outside websites where students will do a little bit of reading, watching a video, seeing pretty much anything that you have online that you want to share with your students. All right. And of course, if you want to do a shareable link to a slideshow, you can do that as well. Here's how to do that. So if you want to share your slideshow link to your Hyperdoc, which is a really good idea, again, it's something that the example did, we'll go up to the share button when you are in your Google Slides here. And we have to click on this Get Shareable Link button up here. All right. Now, the one thing you'll have to do is make sure it has this option here that says anyone with a link can view. If it doesn't have that, click on this little drop down and then look for the correct option. If it doesn't come up in this first one, look for more and then find it right here. Anyone with a link can view. Okay, and then save. Now, here's the couple different caveats here to that point. When you share something through Google with somebody, if you're sharing a Hyperdoc with your students, you have a couple things you have to consider. One, do you want them to only look at it, or do you want them to actually be able to edit it, or do you want each student to get their very own copy? Okay, so allowing them to view or edit is what you could do with this share menu here, but if you want students to each get their own copy, I recommend using Google Classroom. If you haven't used Google Classroom, check out the Google Classroom challenge card as your next challenge. In Classroom, you can set your assignments when they're given to students to automatically make a copy for each student. That's one really good way to do that. If you are kind of not wanting to use Classroom, there is another option. When you are sharing your document with your students, and you get that shareable link, what you'll do is you'll change it, just one little word in the URL from edit to copy. And let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to again take the shareable link from my slideshow here, and I'll say copy. I'm going to go back into our Hyperdoc that we just made here, and I'll just paste it just by itself in here. And we have to look for the word edit right there in the middle. That's actually towards the end. And we're going to erase the word edit and put copy in its place. Okay. Now that that's there, whenever somebody clicks on this, it's going to take them over to this page where it automatically makes a copy for each person that opens it. Okay. So that's a super handy, another little trick for you to remember. So that's another thing to consider when doing your Google Docs, Google Docs with Hyperdocs. All right, so if you wanted to link in your presentation, I'll say, maybe we'll say click here for the class notes. And just like we did in the box above, I'm going to highlight everything, put in the link here, and I still have that pasted on my clipboard, and I'll say apply. So now, whenever somebody clicks on this, click here for class notes, that'll take them over to this Hyperdocs slideshow. And of course, you'll put in your very own slideshow or whatever other Google Doc you need. Okay. So now, of course, the next question may be, well, okay, that kind of seems like a lot of work. Are there some places I can go to find some Hyperdocs that are already kind of out there ready to go? And the answer is a resounding yes. So here on slide number 21, back on our slideshow here, there's a couple different links for you for places to find some more ready to go Hyperdocs. This is one great website, this first one, hyperdocs.co. And it's a pretty good number of Hyperdocs resources for a bunch of different classes. I was a history teacher, so I'll click on history here. And it links over to a Google Drive folder. And if it loads up for me here, there we go. Now it's kind of an open mishmash of a bunch of different hyperdocs for a bunch of different topics. So I'll click on, here we go, colonial resistance. I haven't even looked at this one yet, so let's take a look here. And here's a finished product made by another teacher that's ready to go. So we can look through it, and we can see this one has a nice big picture to start out with. It gives us the definition or the reasoning for the lesson. It has an engage section, a hook at the beginning. It has some directions. It has some pictures. It has some pretty good hook information here. Then it has an explain section where students are watching a video, answering questions, and they do a nice job too of putting in a separate box specifically for students to respond in. That's actually a really, really good idea to include in your Hyperdocs as well, including a specific spot so students know exactly where to put their responses. And we'll keep on running through here. And this one has another like long answer section here. Then we have an apply section. There's another video to check out here. And then at the end, it looks like everybody's going to share on a Padlet with each other. Okay, so this one looks pretty good. This one's 6 pages long. Obviously, this is going to take up a whole lesson, if not more. And if you like this one or any of the things that you find in here, notice I'm in view only. I can't change anything. I can't share it. What I can do, though, is I can make it my own. If I go up to File, and the fourth one down is Make a Copy, and I click on that, that will give me my very own copy. I can move it around to a different folder if I want. Let's just say I just want to put it just in my very own drive here. Now I'll just leave it right there. And I'll say OK. Now it's my very own copy. It's generating the copy right now for me. And once it's done, I'll be able to edit whatever I want. It's my copy now. I can change anything I want on here. I can change the links, change whatever. I can assign it out. I can put it in my Google Classroom. I can do whatever I want with it now. It's all mine. All right. Here is our code word for this webinar today. It is emoji. If you want to get a CEU certificate for watching this webinar, head over to training.neonet.org where you got the link for this webinar. Click on the CEU form link button, do the Google form, and choose emoji. And then you'll get a CEU certificate in your email. Now we'll move on to our next section on interactive direct instruction with Pear Deck and Nearpod. Now, interactive direct instruction, that sounds kind of like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Well, with some technology and these couple really cool tools, that's all we need. We can achieve interactive direct instruction. So let's go ahead and dive in to these couple tools here. So back on the slideshow, I have a couple of examples here. Since we're in this recorded webinar here, I'm just going to show you kind of the finished versions here. So let's go ahead into Pear Deck first. So what Pear Deck is, it's an add-on for your Google Slides. So Google Slides, of course, is like your PowerPoint equivalent. And what Pear Deck does is it allows you to sprinkle in these interactive slides into your slideshow. And what students will do is they will join into your slideshow live with you, and they'll be able to do things on these interactive slides. Now, there's a couple of different types of interactive slides that you can do as the teacher as you're setting this up, but let's go ahead and just do a quick look at a finished example here. So when I was teaching social studies, I took this slideshow from teaching about John F. Kennedy and the Cold War. And I sprinkled in some Pear Deck interactive slides. So on the very first slide, this is the beginning of class. We're just launching the class for the day. It starts out with this interactive slide where students will draw on this slide. And as you can see at the top here, I have a prompt for them here that says, we previously discussed containment. Use this mind map to explain what containment was and why it was important to the United States. And so what students would do is they would each have their own slide like this on their screen, and they would type in or draw right directly on the slide. As the teacher, I would be able to see all the stuff that students do on that slide. And I'd be able to save it for later. There's actually a dashboard that you can look at back on the Hyperdocs website. We'll get there in a minute. So then I went through the rest of the slideshow here. This one was kind of almost like a T-chart, KWL chart kind of thing, where I have students draw or type 2 things they already know about the topic for the day. Then we go into a regular lecture slide. And then we have another sprinkled in formative assessment here. And notice how I'm just basically hitting them every other slide. So in this one, this type of slide here, we have some terms in the middle, and all I have students do is just draw a line from the term to the correct picture. So they just draw the lines connecting each term to each picture. All right? This will only take about a minute, maybe 2 to do. Then we go into another couple of regular lecture slides. Then we go into a true-false, and again, this is another interactive one. Students will get, it's essentially just this big blue dot that they'll move over to whichever side. Then we have a couple more. Then we go into another regular lecture, couple slides here. And then we go into another interactive thing for them. In this case, I have a little timeline here. And each of those blank spots, I have students type in or draw the correct answers. All right? And then at the end here, I have a conclusion slide. And from here, students will just have an opportunity to explain what they learned from class, kind of framed in a way where you're pretending that your friend was absent from today, and you're explaining to them what we did in class that day. So that's a really good way to close out a lesson. And as you saw, this is a fully done lesson here. This would probably take up, depending on how much detail you go into, a good chunk of a full class period, depending on how long your periods are, of course. All right, so that's kind of like the finished product here. And what we want to do now is look at quickly how to make a pear deck from scratch here. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up a brand new slideshow here. And of course, you can use a slideshow that you already have a bunch of stuff in, and you can just sprinkle in those pear deck interactive slides as you want. For our purposes, I'm just going to start with just a blank one here. And we're going to go ahead into the add-ons menu at the top here. Notice I already have Pear Deck installed, but if you don't, we have to go to the Get Add-ons button here. And then we'll just search for it. I already have it, so we'll just install it from there. Then once you have it, you only have to do that once. And then we'll have the Pear Deck button here under the Add-ons tab. Then it's going to open up this sidebar for us here. And this is how we're going to be adding in all those interactive slides. And this is also how we're going to launch it in class. I'll talk more about that in just a second. All right, so on this first page of the sidebar, if we scroll down a little bit, we'll see the template library is the very first thing, which is good because that's the thing we're going to go to most often. There are some featured content and like updates and that sort of stuff. And then we have these kind of blank questions. For our purposes, we're just going to use the templates though. So we'll just stick with this first button up here, our template library. And the really nice thing is they have them separated by beginning of lessons, during lesson, and end of lesson. And if we go into beginning of lesson here, we have a bunch of different types of slides in here. Now, the way to know what this slide does is the little description below. So like in this very first one, it says text slide below it. And then over to the side, we have a little question mark. And it lets you know what the students are going to be doing on that slide. So this one's a text and it says, students type a response to your prompt on their devices. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. And all these ones that say text slide are the exact same thing. All the stuff that's just on the slide is editable. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. Then we have another type here, a drawing slide. So students draw an image or text on their device in response to your prompt. We have another text slide, another text slide. This one's a draggable slide, so here's the other kind. So the draggable, students drag icons on the screen in response to your prompt. So as you can kind of tell, the common theme here is you just have a prompt on the screen and then the students are going to do something with it. All right, so let's start out simple here. We'll just start with this very first one that says text slide. Just give it a single click and it's going to load for a second. It's going to add it in to our slideshow. There it goes. It does not replace the current slide, it just adds a new slide on there for you. All right, now on the main part of our screen here, let's go into editing this slide here. So this is, already has a pretty nice looking template. Anything that is in the main part of the screen here, anything that's in the slide, you can change. If you don't want it to say bell ringer up here, if you want to change these instructions, all this stuff is editable, so you can change whatever you want. You can change even these boxes and what it says in these boxes. That's totally fine. You can put anything that you want on here. All right, so if you just wanted to just simply have just a question on here, I'll just get rid of all this stuff here. I don't want all this 1, 2, 3 stuff. I just want a bell ringer question here. I just want this to be in the middle, and I'll say, what did we talk about yesterday? Very simple, right? And that's totally fine. That is a pretty simple bell ringer kind of activity here. The only thing a couple things you cannot change is this dark bar at the bottom here. Yes, you'll be able to move it and stuff, but you're going to want to keep this here, essentially just as a reminder that it is a interactive slide. All right, and you also do not want to change any of the stuff down here that is in the speaker notes down here. You can add stuff to it if you really need to, but just don't get rid of this bar and don't delete anything in here, just as a best practice. All right, now let's keep going here. Let's put in a different type of slide. Let's do a drawing slide. And again, these are just templates that are here, so you can change whatever you want on them. If you don't want it to be a T-chart like it is here, you can change it up into something else. So let's make this one into a Venn diagram real quick. So I'm going to get rid of all these numbers and these lines and stuff. They're just shapes, so I can just get rid of them. Maybe I'll change the directions to say complete this Venn diagram. Okay, and then I can draw my own Venn diagram in here. So I'm just going to come up to my shapes and I'll just draw a couple of circles here. That. Kind of small, but that's all right. Just doing this quickly here. And then students would be able to draw in whatever they want in the Venn diagram. The background stays static, meaning the Venn diagram itself, the circles, are not going to be able to move for the students, but they will be able to type or draw anything on this slide. We'll see the student side of things in just a little bit too. All right. Then from here, you're able just to add in whatever you want. So if we come back to the sidebar and go back a menu and go into the during lesson activities, this is where we have all these other types of slides. All right, and then from this during lessons sidebar menu here, this is where we have all those different kinds of slides here, and you can pull in any one of them just like we did in the beginning of lesson type. And again, they're all editable, so you can change whatever you want. The one caveat here, if you want to do a multiple choice slide, and if you want to have customizable answers, you're going to have to come back out to the very first level of the sidebar menu and do a choice option from here, and just kind of have to create it from scratch. Okay. All right, and then from there, once you build out your whole slideshow, sprinkling in a bunch of interactive bits throughout your slideshow, then it's time to launch it in class and have students join into your Pear Deck session. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So after we have our slideshow built, we're going to come over to the add-ons tab again and make sure we have our Pear Deck sidebar opened. And unlike we're used to, we're not going to come up to the regular present button up here, the big white one. Instead, we have to do the present lesson green button here from the Pear Deck sidebar. When we click on that, it's going to go ahead and launch Pear Deck in a new tab for us here. And it's going to turn on a join code here. If you have the free version, it's going to keep doing this pop-up for you to try to get you to pay for it, but the free version is good enough. I mean, if you want to do the premium version, that's still a really good thing to have too. But anyway, so here's the join code. So this is what students would do. You're going to shine this up on the big screen with your projector, and then what students are going to do is they're going to go to joinpd.com and they'll put in the code that comes up here. So I'm going to go ahead and use a kind of like a dummy student account here to show you what the student side looks like. So let's go ahead to a new window here. I'm going to go to joinpd.com. And then it's just going to give us a spot to put in our code. There's our code. It's going to have us sign in. So it is tracking your students by who says what. And it's going to load for us here. It's going to bring us in and give us a how you feeling today. So I'll do a little smiley face. And again, this is the student side of things, and this is what the students are going to see here. It's going to pull up the whatever I have on screen for that. So I'm going to try to do a split window here, try to make this as visible as possible. So on the right side, this is the teacher view. On the left side, this is the student view. So once I have all my students in, I can see how many I have down in the bottom. So I have one in. Of course, you'll have a bigger class probably, but we'll go ahead and start the class here. The reason I'm only seeing a white screen here is because I just had a blank white slide, so that was the first slide. If I go to the next slide, up on the teacher side, it's going to take me over to the next slide. On the student side, it is going to bring me there as well. Wherever the teacher goes, the students will follow. So, and the students have no way to go to a different slide, which is really, really cool. Now, as the teacher, you can allow students to have free roam. They call it student paced mode on the teacher side. If you want to turn on student paced mode, you go to the little three dots at the bottom when you're presenting, and we'll just say turn on student paced mode. That allows them, notice a couple buttons came up on the student side here, to go to whichever options they want. All right. If not, I can turn back off student paced mode, and they have to go where I'm at. All right, so on the student side here, let me make this bigger so we can see the text box here. So this is the text style of slide here, where we only have a text box to answer in. So if we were talking about, World War II yesterday, and that's going to be a response. For the teacher, I can have the option of showing students' responses. Again, the right side of the screen is the teacher screen, and this is what would be shown up on the projector. If I want to show everybody's responses, I'll just click on this little projector screen icon, and it's going to show everybody's responses up on the big screen. If I want to hide them away, just click it again. All right? And all these are just going to show up on screen. You'll also notice it does not show students' names. It does not show who says what. Now, the nice thing about that is for your students that are maybe apprehensive for speaking out in class, if they don't have the confidence or they're afraid of saying the wrong answer or something like that, that kind of gets rid of it. You can students can type in whatever here without the fear of being wrong. Okay, as the teacher, you will be able to go back later and see who says what. So if students do type something inappropriate on purpose, afterwards you'll be able to see, you'll have a record of who exactly says what. And that's why students sign in when they come into the session right from the get-go. All right, and if we go to the next slide here, let's go back into the student page here. And this is the drawing type of slide. So we have a bunch of different colors that students can do. There's a pencil, a highlighter, a line, text, and an eraser. And like I said, they have just free reign over this slide, and they can just start typing in whatever, or typing or drawing whatever they want. Like in this case, it's a graphic organizer, so it's kind of harder to draw things on there. So maybe I'll do a text box here. Change up my sizer here to get rid of this stuff easier to do. There we go. And we come to the text box. Draw the text box, things. Draw another text box. Stuff, whatever they need to put in those text boxes. Anyway, so back over to the teacher side. Once you are done with your lesson, we just come down to the end button in the bottom. You can give it a name if you need to. So, say, September 18th, whatever, you can call it whatever you want. We'll save and edit. Back on the student side, it kicks them out. They're done with the session. All right. Back on the teacher side, it just drops us back off at our Google Slides here. And then let's talk about looking back at all of your previous sessions. So the way to do that is we're going to head off to the Pear Deck website, peardeck.com. And this is just another one of those websites that you can sign in with Google. So we're going to go ahead and do teacher login up in the top. And I'll stick with my free version, thank you very much. And as it's loading me in here, once we get in here, there's more to Pear Deck than we're going to cover in this video. We're just going to try to give you the basics here. There's another cool activity called the Flashcard Factory, but for our purposes, we're going to skip past that. Then we're going to come up to the Sessions tab up in the top left once you're logged in, and now we're going to be able to see all these previous sessions that we held. Now, in the free version, you're kind of limited with what they call the teacher dashboard. The dashboard will give you a whole bunch of statistics and details and everything. In the free version, you get kind of limited access to that stuff. The biggest thing to use, I think, is if I want to see a report of how many students participated and what they did in my Pear Deck session. The best thing to do is find the session. So here's the one we just did, September 18th. We come to the three dots at the end and we do export to spreadsheet. And it's just going to take all that information and drop it into a Google Sheet for us. And once this loads up for you here, you're going to see all our details. So we have the date, we have our student's name, and of course if you have more students, the row will just continue on with all your students. Then we have all of our answers. Of course, we only had 2 slides in our Pear Deck, but of course you'll have as many as you want going that way. Now here's the one caveat. In the free version, if you are looking to have a strict record of what students said, you're going to have to use a text-only slide or a multiple-choice slide. Okay. Notice in the drawing option, I have no way of seeing what the student drew. All it says is drawing. Okay, in the free version, that's all you're going to be able to see, unfortunately. So if it's something that you need to track for points or participation, make sure you use the text-only slide type. Okay, so that's essentially all there is to Pear Deck. The thing you're probably just going to spend the most time doing is just creating the slideshows themselves and putting in all of the interactive bits in there. Okay. So let's jump over to our other interactive direct instruction tool here called Nearpod. So let's go ahead and give a click to our example here. And Nearpod is very similar to Pear Deck. It is very, very similar. I kind of think of it as the bigger brother of Pear Deck. All right, it does essentially the same thing, but you kind of have some more options to it. Now, Nearpod is completely its own website, and it has a lot of, the nice thing is it has a lot of pre-made materials and slideshows on the website already, which is cool. There's a lot of good stuff for free. Of course, there is stuff that you can get if you pay. In this example here, I found this biology lesson here on Punnett squares. And this was just a free lesson I found, and I thought this was a pretty good example. So let's go ahead and we're going to do a preview here. And let's go ahead and look at some of these slides here as it is just an interactive slideshow, and it essentially works the same way. So let's go ahead and get started here. So we have an open-ended question here once we get through all the credits and all that stuff. But as you can see on this first real interactive slide, we have a definition section here, and this is just a short answer text box here that students would type in their answers, very similar to the thing that we saw over in Pear Deck. We also have a poll. This is another thing that we didn't see in Pear Deck. This one's set up as a multiple choice, and students would just obviously click on whichever one they want. And we can just kind of keep running through this whole slideshow. It's a little bit easier to embed web pages. They'll actually pop up on their very own window. And if we keep on going, let's find one more example. Here's our drawing drawing slide, just like we saw over in Pear Deck. It's very similar. Students can draw whatever that you tell them to draw in here, or they'll be able to draw something with a pen or a pencil and have an eraser. They can also, in this version, in Nearpod here, they can also input pictures too. That's something they can't do over in Pear Deck. So if you wanted to have students upload a picture from their computer or like a screenshot or something, this is a really, really cool way to do it. All right, so we can keep on running through that, but let's look at the student side of things. This was just a preview, but I wanted to do the same thing that we did over in Pear Deck, where we compare the student and teacher views. So let's go ahead. I'm going to jump over to the home screen here. I'm going to go ahead and log in real quick. And this is another one of those Google login pages here. And I'm going to find my science folder. And Pear Deck's your library in Pear Deck, or I'm sorry, Nearpod, in Nearpod is very similar to your Google Drive. It just saves all your files here for you. Notice you can create your own interactive slideshow. So if you already have something set up in Google Slides, you can do the same thing where you sprinkle in those interactive bits throughout. Of course, I have this one already ready to go. So when I hover over a slideshow here, I have a couple options. I have an option to do a live lesson and an option to do a student-paced lesson. So what's the difference? Live lesson is students are in there with me at the same time, just like we saw in Pear Deck. Or student-paced is you essentially just assign out the interactive slideshow and students can go and do it whenever. They don't even have to join into the session when you are there. All right, so they can even be essentially used as homework. For our purposes, let's go ahead and do a live lesson here. So when we open up our live lesson here, the setup for getting students in is the exact same process that we saw over in Pear Deck. So students are going to go to nearpod.com and put in that link. So let's go over to a student tab here. This is nearpod.com. And once we get in here, we'll have a code up on the top. That's where I'll paste in that code for us here. And then we have an option for putting in our name. I'll just put in Dan. All right. So now we are in the slideshow, and just like we saw over in Pear Deck, no matter how much I click and do stuff, I can't move on to the next slide unless the teacher turns on student-paced mode. All right. So back on the teacher side of things, down in the bottom left, I see how many students I have in. I can get a nice little quick list. And then I can start moving on. Let's go into our first interactive slide here. Let's actually do this one. This one's kind of an interesting one. So when we have a multiple choice slide, it gives us a bunch of stats here on the teacher screen. So let me jump over to the student side and choose one of those answers. And then watch what happens over here on the teacher side. We get a breakdown of all the responses that we're getting. All right. Now the cool thing is, this is another thing that kind of makes Nearpod the bigger brother of Pear Deck. We can choose to either show or hide students' names. We have the choice here. So if we want to show students' names, if we don't want to show them, that's totally our choice. So we can just flip that button whenever we want. All right, and again, it essentially works the same way from there for going throughout your lesson. So you can sprinkle in all those interactive parts that you want. You go to a slide, and if you have the teacher-paced mode on, it's going to go, the students are going to go wherever you want them to go. All right, now if you want to make your own, let me go ahead and just get out of this whole thing here. I'm going to go ahead and close out of the session here. And I'm going to head back to my library here. And as we can see, I have a pretty good amount of stuff sitting here in my library. Again, in the free version of Nearpod, you do get a pretty good amount of space in your library to save stuff around. The downside is you are limited. I don't remember offhand what the amount of space that you have is, but you are limited in the total amount of space, and you are limited in how big each slideshow is. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you do the paid version, you get more space. All right, so if you want to create one from scratch, like I said before, we can just grab something from your Google Slides, or you can just create it all within Nearpod. All right, if you are making something totally from scratch, you might as well just make it in Nearpod. But if you have a slideshow that's already basically just made in Google Slides, we'll give a click on there. It's going to go into our Google Drive for us. It's going to go start looking around for other slideshows. And let's give it a second here. And as that finishes loading, it's going to give us this kind of like this template slide for us here that's going to explain how to get your Google Slides activities over into Nearpod. Essentially, you just have to get the Nearpod add-on. You can add interactivity from in here, and then you can save it. So you have the choices. If you want to build it totally within the Nearpod website, you can do that. Or if you want to build it all within Google Slides, you can do that as well, just like how Pear Deck is. You can do it either way. Okay, and the add-on for time purposes, we'll kind of glide past it. But the add-on is very similar to the way that Pear Deck works. Essentially, you just choose what type of interactive slide that you want, and then you just put in your prompts or questions, and that's pretty much it. When you go to launch it, you go to the Nearpod website and have students join in like we just saw. Okay. All right, and then the last thing we want to look at back in the Nearpod website here is we want to look at all the free stuff that's out there. So I'm going to head off to make sure you're at our Nearpod homepage here. And what we want to do is go into the Nearpod lesson library here. And I always like to go for the free stuff. And then you can just sort it out by whatever grade or subject that you want. I'll go ahead and do social studies here. And we can find all this great stuff. You do have some things that are called bundles that are just multiple slideshows together. So you can look at any of these things. And again, I have it filtered by free. So all this stuff on this page here is free, and it's even loading more. So there's a ton of stuff to choose from. Of course, if you need to search for something specific, so maybe I'll say Kennedy. And let's see if we have any of the free, not free stuff. Yeah, and then this one's not a free one, but we can take a look at it anyway. So if we want to see if a paid one is worth getting, we can check it out. And it goes into all of the slides here. And we can see how this looks. That goes over to a website, goes into an open-ended question here, kind of right in the middle of things, which is, again, a really good way to make this an interactive activity where students aren't just passively listening to the information. They have to be actively participating in the slideshow, in the activity. All right, so once you have something brought into your Nearpod library, it's there in there. You can access it whenever you need, and you can just grab any lesson that you have here, and you're ready to launch it in class and have students join it. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up here. So what do we need to use Pear Deck? Essentially all we need is a Google account, a Google Slides with all your content, the Pear Deck add-on. It's nice to have the Pear Deck extension. It's not super important, but it is nice to have. Students, of course, you're going to need them. So the students can join in with a computer, Chromebook, laptop, or smartphone, any sort of device that can get onto the internet. That's all you need. And then students will require a Google login. For Nearpod, it's essentially all the same stuff. This one does not require a Google login. However, I believe you can turn it on, but students will be able to put in their name. All right. So now that brings us to the end of our little webinar here for Hyperdocs and other interactive activities. So over this video here, we talked about creating your own Hyperdocs and where to find them, really what they are, and then we transitioned over to another type of interactive activity where we can really make our direct instruction interactive, and hopefully that's not seen as an oxymoron anymore. All right, so that was all our topics for today. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Have a great day.